Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
There's no bigger difference between a curious person and an incurious person. You know, as soon as you meet somebody, as soon as you sit next to them at dinner or at some kind of event, whether or not that person is really kind of genuinely curious about you or about whatever the topic of discussion is. And when, of course, you meet a curious person, it's delight. They tend to be much more pleasurable and interesting, just generally better people. And yet, of course, I don't really understand why anybody. Stephen Fry made this comment a few years ago. Why are people incurious? It seems to be. He says it's the oddest and most foolish failing there is. There's no excuse for it, especially now that we have access to so much fascinating knowledge and information. But it's not just me. It turns out that this divide between the curious and the incurious is an increasingly important one. Highly curious people are in greater demand than ever before in modern economies, and they're pulling away from everyone else. So we're having a lot of debates in this country around inequality at the moment and around the developed world, and we hear a lot about the 1%, but that diverts us slightly from a wider inequality, which is that there's a growing pay gap between the highly educated and the rest in developed economies. So this data is from the US, but similar shift can be observed in the UK and other developed economies. You can see there's a growing gap here. There's a gap between people with a degree, some college education, and no college education, which is the kind of the flat line. But the growing gap is between people with a 4-year degree and the rest. According to Sophie von Stumm, who's a psychologist at Birkbeck, educational achievement is driven by curiosity. So she calls a hungry mind the single best predictor of educational achievement. So curious people are the people who are really kind of driving this trend. And it's not just educational achievement that's driven by curiosity. It's also increasingly success in the workplace after education. And the underlying reason for that is that technology is replacing routine work. So even work that requires a degree of knowledge and intelligence, if it's just routine, then robots are replacing it. And that's what technology replaces first, and it has done throughout history. But increasingly, as we move forward, you'll see smart machines do this more and more, is they're taking over the routine jobs. So curious people, intellectually curious people, people who are capable of learning throughout their career, of asking questions, good questions, of adapting and collaborating with others from different disciplines, people who are capable of really thriving in this world of non-routine work, in other words, are the people that are going to do better. So there's been a lot of debate among psychologists over this for decades, because curiosity is a slightly baffling combination of intellect, emotion, and drive. But the simplest and most profound model of curiosity was created by George Loewenstein, who's a psychologist and a behavioral economist. And he says that curiosity is generated when you face an information gap. When you know something, but you know that you don't know everything. And this makes you want to know more. It's deceptively powerful theory. It's very simple, but it's very powerful. Because what it's saying is that curiosity doesn't exist in a vacuum. You need the bait of information in order to want more. So just to give you a mundane example, let's say I'm talking to you, and let's imagine that you know nothing about opera and a lot about football, or quite a lot about football. And as we're talking, I drop in some intriguing fact about opera. You probably won't be that interested in it because you don't know anything about operas. You've got nothing really to get purchase on. And so you'll wait until the conversation moves on. If I then drop in something intriguing about football, you go, oh, really? Is that true? I didn't know that. Because you had that kind of base of knowledge about football in order to get more interested. If the conversation had stopped after I dropped in the fascinating opera fact, which, by the way, I never do, so you have to worry about that, I might have thought, oh, that's an incurious person. What I didn't understand is that your curiosity depends on what knowledge you have in the first place, and whether or not that therefore creates an information gap for you. Now, storytellers understand this principle of information gaps instinctively. And they are masters at creating information gaps, at opening them up and closing them, and then opening them up and closing them. That's basically how a narrative works. That's how it unspools. So Agatha Christie will tell you in her opening chapter that Mr. Ratchet was stabbed to death in his compartment. That engages your attention, and the information gap, you don't know who did it, sucks you in. And every chapter she'll give you a bit more information and open up another gap, and she'll sort of pull you through the narrative. So that's basically how narrative and storytelling play, opening up information gaps, closing them, opening them up, closing them. And you'll see the same principle at work in the way that the modern internet works. So this is a wonderful quote from Peter Coachley, who's the founder of Upworthy, the viral news organization. And he understands this theory of information gaps very well. I mean, he's explicitly referenced it, and he's put it to work with incredible success. Upworthy and other viral news sites are experts at opening up information gaps in their headlines, itches that you have to scratch. So he says it explicitly here. Social headlines, he calls it a curiosity gap. Social headlines need to create a curiosity gap. Too vague and I don't care, too specific and I don't need to click. That's the judgment that he makes when he's writing headlines. In a broader sense, it's the judgment that any storyteller makes when they're telling their story at any one point. So the internet, the modern internet, has turned the creation of information gaps into a fine art, or rather a very highly commercial art. But does this kind of curiosity that I've been talking about, this opening and closing of gaps, and the way the internet is constantly inviting you to scratch an itch, does it lead to learning and expertise and innovation? Not necessarily. We need to distinguish between two types of curiosity. The kind I've been describing is what psychologists call diversive curiosity. Diversive curiosity is basically the hunger for the new and the novel. It's what makes you click on that flashing link. It's what makes you want to click through from that headline to find out what's behind it. And diversive curiosity is important because it takes us off in new directions, right? It gets us off our beaten track. But by itself, it can become rather superficial and futile. Epistemic curiosity is what happens when diversive curiosity grows up, basically. When we combine diversive curiosity with effort, self-discipline, and focus, it becomes deeper and more enduring. So epistemic curiosity is the lifelong quest for knowledge, for learning. The desire not just to find answers, but to explore new questions. Epistemic curiosity enables us to build our knowledge bases and to make connections between the knowledge we have, leading to new ideas and discoveries, like the structure of DNA. So just to make that distinction clear, diversive curiosity versus epistemic curiosity. Diversive curiosity is about novelty and the new. Epistemic curiosity is about building knowledge. Diversive curiosity is impulsive. It seizes you. It's almost like it's something that is done to you, and you can't resist it. Whereas epistemic curiosity is a conscious choice. It's cultivated. And when I talk about the curiosity divide, what I'm really talking about is people who practice epistemic curiosity versus those who don't. Epistemically curious people move in this virtuous circle. They're always building their stocks of knowledge. The more they know, the more they realize they don't know, and the more, therefore, they want to know. So, why? Because we start off with this wonderful inheritance. We're programmed to be curious. We're born with a very powerful instinct that there is stuff we don't know, which, when you think about it, is not necessarily a given. How do we know there is stuff that we don't know as children? We're also born with an instinct that other people are stores of knowledge. Little children are like investigative reporters, pumping their sources for knowledge. The researcher Michel Chouinard recorded the conversations that families have at home and discovered that between the ages of 3 and 5, children ask 40,000 questions on average. The questions she was counting were specifically explanatory questions, how and why questions. So the evolutionary reason for this is that we're cultural animals, okay? So unlike any other animal, we can be born pretty much in any environment, physical environment on the planet, and survive.
We're not stuck in one particular ecological niche. And the way we survive is by becoming part of a cultural vehicle. And so we seem to realize, right from when we're babies, that we need to learn stuff if we're going to survive, because we need to become part of this cultural world. And we need to learn a lot, so we ask a lot of questions. And then we go to school. And schools, of course, should be crucibles of curiosity. But the evidence suggests that we ask fewer questions at school than we do at home. And natural curiosity seems to wane. There is a correlation-causation question here. Just because curiosity declines when kids get to school doesn't mean schools are causing that decline. And to a certain extent, some of the boredom and frustration most of us experience at school is a byproduct of a hard truth, which is that learning stuff is hard work. One of the things that children learn with great reluctance is that it takes effort to learn and remember. But epistemic curiosity, not just seeking the new but building stocks of knowledge, requires focus and persistence and discipline. And teachers and parents have to work hard to help kids work at it. And as adults, of course, it's not just children, as adults we have to keep working at that ourselves. And of course the internet is now a central part of our lives and our mental lives in particular. And in some respects the World Wide Web is the best thing that ever happened to curiosity, because it puts the world's information at our fingertips. But it's not all good. It's not straightforwardly good for our curiosity. In a way, the internet is so efficient at finding answers that it doesn't give our curiosity time to incubate and grow, because it takes away the need for effort and persistence. So when you think about it, the whole point of Google's search facility in particular, is to close down information gaps, to save us from the itch of curiosity. They are getting better and better and better at answering questions, almost before we've had time to think of them. And that can make us lazy. If we outsource our curiosity to Google, we lose the habit of it. This is Amit Singhal, who's the head of search at Google. An interviewer asked him a couple of years ago if he was helped in his efforts to improve and refine the algorithm that Google use by the fact that perhaps users were getting better at asking the right kinds of questions, at phrasing their questions. And he sort of sighed and he said, no, the more accurate the machine gets, the lazier the questions become. So the internet is this incredibly powerful tool, but if we let it sever the link between curiosity and effort, then it will ultimately endanger epistemic curiosity. And of course, the other way in which it endangers epistemic curiosity is that it's so good at just entertaining us, at taking our brain power and putting it into things which really are about lots of things, but they're not about building knowledge. This is one of the best ever replies on Reddit. If someone from the 1950s suddenly appeared today, what would be the most difficult thing to explain to them about life today? And the most popular answer by far: I possess a device in my pocket that is capable of accessing the entirety of information known to man. I use it to look at pictures of cats and get in arguments with strangers. And I think there's a great, profound truth there that we all should bear in mind. So if there's one thing that I'd like you to take away from this talk and from the book, it's that curiosity is a muscle. Use it or lose it. But it's something that we consciously have to nurture in ourselves, in our families, in classrooms, at work. The basic truth of the modern world, and one I've really been talking about all the way through, is that the more knowledge you absorb, the more knowledge you acquire, the better you will do. Sometimes I hear that curiosity and creativity are killed by too many facts, but actually the opposite is true. The more you know, the more you want to know. Okay, we talked about that principle already, but that's the most profoundly important principle of curiosity. Not only that, but the more you know, the more connections you can make between the different bits of knowledge that you have in your head, and therefore the more ideas you will have. Which is why curiosity is really the wellspring of creativity. This is Leo Burnett, one of the great madmen, founder of the global ad agency that bears his name today. He's not the only person to say this, but there is obviously a very important connection between being curious and being creative. So build a database is number one. Second one, hunt like a foxhog. I've invented an animal for this one. At the workplace, we have traditionally faced a choice. We can be specialists or generalists. We can know a little about a lot and specialize, go deep into one thing, or we can be a generalist who knows a lot about a little. Now, you can think about it in terms of the ancient story about the hedgehog and the fox. The fox knows many things about how to survive, while the hedgehog knows just one thing: spikes up when attacked. But the highest paying jobs of the future, like software development, are getting very cognitively complex. They require deep, hedgehog-like expertise in one specialism. But there's a countervailing trend, which is that as complexity grows, as workplaces get more complex, and companies collaborate more with other companies, so that we need more collaboration across disciplines. So actually, curious people tend to be better at collaboration because they have a little bit of knowledge about what other people are up to, and they're interested in learning about it, even if they don't. So we need to be both fox and hedgehog, knowing a lot about one thing and a little, or actually quite a lot, about everything else. Another way of putting this is that we need to be T-shaped, which is something that companies like IBM look for when they're recruiting people. They look for T-shaped workers, people with deep expertise in one discipline, which gives them their kind of USP in that marketplace and even within the company itself, and then a wide breadth of knowledge of everything else, which makes them better at collaboration because they're able to hook up with people from different disciplines and different specialities and bring teams together. Third one is question your teaspoons. To the curious person, everything is interesting. The French writer Georges Perec was an advocate of getting curious about the mundane, about the everyday stuff that's around us, the stuff that is so familiar to us that it becomes invisible. He calls it the infraordinary, because you can't really see it. It's the opposite of the extraordinary. And he urges us to question your teaspoons. Here's somebody who does that, for a living, really. Jerry Seinfeld was asked where he gets his material from in an interview last year, and he just said, from around me. Chairs. Chairs are inherently amusing. I find the fork very funny. Again, it's another reason that curiosity is a wellspring of ideas and creativity. So it makes you see things that other people can't see in the ordinary. But of course, the true beauty of curiosity is that it takes you out of yourself. It makes you, I think, happier and more fulfilled. There's actually plenty of evidence for this as well. But it takes you out of yourself. It reminds you that you're part of a far greater project, one that's been underway for generations, and for as long as humans have been talking to each other. And the best expression of this link between happiness and curiosity is from a children's classic, slightly forgotten these days, called The Once and Future King by T.H. White. "The best thing for being sad," replied Merlin, beginning to puff and blow, "is to learn something. That's the only thing that never fails. You may grow old and trembling in your anatomies. You may lie awake at night listening to the disorder of your veins. You may miss your only love. You may see the world about you devastated by evil lunatics, or know your honor trampled in the sewers of baser minds. There is only one thing for it then, to learn. Learn why the world wags and what wags it. That's the only thing which the mind can never exhaust, never alienate, never be tortured by, never fear or distrust, and never dream of regretting. Learning is the only thing for you. Look what a lot of things there are to learn."